the truth always comes out. And then problems they don't go away, number one. They also don't stay the same. They always grow, and they get hairier, and they grow legs, and they get up and they start running around and causing all sorts of problems, and they just cause all sorts of chaos and ripple effects. It's not a matter of if you're going to have to address this issue. It's a matter of when are you going to address it, and how big are you going to let it get? Hi, Mark. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start with this. Give us a little bit of background about what you do, and tell us a little bit about your business.
Thanks, Todd. Good morning. My name's Marc Gravely. My law firm is just Gravely, PC, and we represent owners exclusively in construction disputes with general contractors, architects, engineers. We only work on a contingency, so we are budget neutral. So when an owner hires us, we help the owner to evaluate what's gone wrong. I got here kind of a long path. Thanks for asking. I started off representing architects and engineers exclusively here in Texas, and then went on to represent some very large general contractors with a firm. And then I decided that I thought there was a market for legal services that limited the representation to only owners and only contingency on a contingency fee. And it turns out that there's a huge market for that. So I feel like that we really help to level the playing field for owners in the war of attrition that sometimes comes with conflict with design professionals or contractors.
Yeah. So before we hit record, we were talking about how you view contractors. So I'll just say what a lot of people are probably thinking, which is what I told you, like, attorneys. I'd much rather like walk into a room full of snakes than talk to attorneys, right? Because typically the only time contractors get involved and have a conversation with an attorney is when something goes bad and there's litigation and that sort of thing. So I believe that attorneys are incredibly valuable at solving issues, and we're going to talk about how to prevent issues. But how do you think about contractors? Let's just talk about that. What's your perspective on contractors?
Well, I can tell you, we need contractors. Many great general contractors that do fantastic work. It's always amazed me that a man or woman with a pickup truck and a shovel can pull together subcontractors, can follow a design, can use their wisdom and wherewithal to build beautiful buildings that we live our lives in, to build infrastructure. America needs contractors. They're part of how America moves and succeeds and wins in the world marketplace. And so some of the most inspiring things in life are things built by the hands of men and women. And so I've got a soft spot in my heart for general contractors who help us to build America and to build the places that we live, work, and play.
Yeah, it's when you zoom out, which is tough to do when you've been in it for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But when you zoom out and look at the construction process, somebody puts some lines on paper, right, in the form of documents, drawings. Then they put words in a spec book that specify what it needs to look like. And then construction professionals come together, they estimate what the cost is going to be, and then there's this contract that's written, which consists of words and lines on paper, and that gets turned into reality, which is, if you think about it, it's remarkable that it ever works, right?
Well, it's even more phenomenal than that, Todd. I'll tell you, if you look back at the history of civilizations, the most successful civilizations have things that are built that are good and workable. Bridges, the Roman aqueducts from even thousands of years ago, some of which are still standing. Colosseum in Rome, the Great Pyramids in South America and the Middle East. These are just a few of the thousands of examples of things that people build that define us, that help us to live better lives. And, the fact is, way back when there was no spec book, there were plans, of course, and calculations and cubits. Some even would say that, the biblical building of the ark was a great construction project, which of course, yes. And so people that can bring all those different aspects together, time, space, material, and then keep a schedule. Holy cow, right? Some would say miraculous. And in some circumstances, the engineering or the architecture is miraculous. And in some cases, a contractor is able to get things done that folks just didn't think could be done. And there's, many examples of that too. And so sometimes it's just a miracle it all comes together. There's the old adage about, if construction's involved, there's going to be delays. Well, yes, of course there is. And, you can figure that into your agreement with the owner. And so, yeah, it's a good and great thing that we have here. And it's to be admired. And it's interesting that it ever really comes together sometimes.
Yeah. The reality is sometimes there are issues. Things don't come together perfectly. So let's talk about this. From your perspective, what are some of the most common construction defects in buildings that lead to litigation?
Well, at this point, I've probably handled many hundreds, if not 1,000, construction projects or clients that deal with certain issues. And, we break things down into systems because, I'm a big believer in process system, following a system, having a procedure, having a process. And so when something goes wrong, it's always with a system in a building, HVAC system, a wall system, a window system, a grading and drainage system, a roof system. And so symptoms of those are particular to each system, but the most common construction defects that we see on large projects that are non-infrastructure projects, I would say, are HVAC issues and moisture issues in windows due to envelope issues. That's what we see most often, HVAC and envelope issues, I would say.
And with the HVAC system issues, is it a performance issue? Is it an air quality issue? What can you tell us a little bit more about what the biggest problems are you see with HVAC?
I can. So, by the time we get called, apart from helping to negotiate the contract itself or recommend to the owner the contractual provisions, what we see is an HVAC system that possibly was not designed right, which of course is not the contractor's fault. Sometimes it wasn't installed correctly, which usually is the contractor's fault. Sometimes we see that it's not being operated correctly by the owner. Maybe sometimes it's not being maintained properly. And so, but usually what it is that if a system is installed, either designed or installed improperly, it can never be maintained properly. And so too much humidity in the air, maybe the air balance isn't right, and a part of the building is cold and the other part of the building is warm. And so that symptomatically results in complaints from the occupants or the owner that they can't control either the heat or the cool, depending on time of year, of course, or moisture on the windows, which is always a huge problem if it goes on too long, because that can lead to other things, sick building syndrome, that type of thing.
Can you give us an example of an issue that turned out to be either, let's say it was a design issue?
So a great example of a design issue is, for example, when let's say a hospital puts on a new wing. Hospitals love to put on new wings, right? The folks that pay for it may get their name on it. The brand new wing is going to be a specialty wing or an extension of an existing wing. And so what happens is it's important that the brick look the same if you're going for that look. It's important that a lot of the architectural finishes are similar or the same. But what a lot of people don't think about is it's important that the balance of the HVAC is designed to comport with the existing HVAC design. And so very often we see on additions, large additions, for example, in hospitals, that the MEP just doesn't really take their time to do their calculations. Sometimes they'll even cut and paste if the square footage is the same or similar, or if the equipment used is the same or similar. And the calculations just weren't done right, thereby leading to, hot air and cold air meeting. And, I think we've all seen the weatherman or the weather lady on TV. And can you see that green background with the map of the US, and they put their hand up there and they say, well, when cold air meets hot air, you get moisture. Well, the same is true in a non-atmospheric or a localized area. When hot and cold air come together, they produce moisture. And so we've seen poor designs resulting in increased moisture in a new addition, for example, in a healthcare setting. And that's a big no-no, especially in a healthcare setting. So that's one example of some improper or poor engineering or engineering malpractice, I would say. Not properly designing or following through on testing and balancing.
So what is one thing that every general contractor should start doing to reduce their risk of construction defect litigation?
Well, there's a couple big things. Typically contractors have risk shifting provisions in their contracts that shifts the risk to subcontractors for work done by their subcontractors, and indemnity provisions. Of course, any general contractor knows that the risk shifting starts with the contract with the subcontractors, and that's wise. The second thing they should do to reduce their risk is to have plenty of insurance. They need a underlying policy, and then they need an excess or umbrella policy. So that's the number one thing they can do to reduce their risk. Because let's remember, when the owner pays the contractor $300 million for a project, part of what the owner is paying for is the liability insurance of the general contractor, and it's a pass-through. At least it should be. And so, when a contractor squeals a little bit about being asked to have more insurance, well, it's a pass-through, or at least should be. And we can talk a little bit more about the or it should be part later on, but plenty of insurance. But the next thing they need to be able to do to reduce their risk is to have confidence in the plans and specifications, and really done a thorough look-see to see if it's something that's constructible. Very often the AIA documents have an implicit warranty of constructability, which has been outlawed in a few states now. But the contractor often makes oral promises if they've got experience in the area. Let's say they build high rises, and they've built enough high rises to know when some engineering aspects of it or some architectural features just can't be done. Well, the contractor needs to speak up and let the owner know that, because owners aren't architects, owners are not engineers, and they're certainly not contractors. They're owners. They come with the money and they're going to occupy. So reduction of risk can happen in those ways. But I would say having a good superintendent with good management skills and a good process for the construction and a nice tight timeline are the best ways that a contractor can reduce their risk. And when we say reduce risk, what are we really talking about here? Reduce the amount of money that they're going to lose, or increase the amount of money they're going to make on a project. Everything that I've just said fits right in with that twin goal of increasing profits and reducing risk.
So you mentioned process, that a superintendent should have a good process. We talk a lot about systems and processes here on the podcast, and that's what our work is with our clients, is to systematize their business. Is there a specific process that you see that's lacking in in a lot of these cases? In other words, wow, if you guys would have just had a process or a system for blank, you would have avoided this.
Right. The answer is absolutely yes. So, the analogy I like to use is, let's say somebody goes on a diet and they know the process they need to follow, but they just don't follow it, right? You want to lose weight? Well, eat less, right? Everybody knows that. How many times can you go outside the recommended process before your goal just is not going to be attainable? The answer is different given different endeavors. So with contractors, it's important that they have something that helps keep them on track and something that helps remind them of each step in the process. And there's software out there that does this, that reminds them. But what I find is the contractors with the best superintendents and the best process adherence are the ones that build the best projects. And it all goes back to, we've all heard of Edward Deming, right? The process guy that helped the auto manufacturing industry and whose principles were adopted by the entire Japanese car industry, such that, he has become sage to them. Well, there's a reason why Japanese cars increased in quality so quickly. It's because they decided to really follow the recommended processes by Edward Deming. And general contractors are no different. Educating the people who are actually going to do the work as to what to follow, how to follow it, and then double checking on what's happening. But also one aspect that a lot of people don't like to talk about because it involves being self-critical. After a project is done, being self-critical about it. What did we do right? What can we get better? The Japanese word for it in the auto process is kaizen, a continual process. That is used in the construction industry to great advantage to the contractors that actually use it, that aren't worried about being self-critical. When you work on a project with a superintendent and subcontractors within a company, nobody wants to be critical of anyone else. People like to say good things about each other. And I'm not talking about office gossip or backbiting, but the fact is that nobody is great all the time, and that self-reflection really leads to improvement. And so, companies shouldn't be afraid to have a little self-critical, look back. What can we do better? Sometimes it's out of your control. Weather, for example, right? Nobody can, if it rains 12 days in a row during a critical time, well, you just can't help that. What's your process to get over that? How did we do getting over that? How did we do following our process? And so, the process mantra will help to mitigate risk, will help contractors to make vastly bigger profits, and to help vastly reduce liabilities if they would just use and stick with and really, really commit to the process.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's talk about on the financial side of the project. What are some of the most common mistakes you see contractors make when it comes to the financial aspect of a project that get them in trouble?
Well, Todd, I don't know if your audience is really going to like hearing this.
Bring it on.
Yeah, so some do this and some don't do this. But remember, I've represented general contractors for a long time, and I know all their secrets. And so when I get a call from an owner, and we take a look at the financial aspects of a project, one of the things I'd like to see that gives me great comfort representing owners is that there is a process that the GC has followed and that they've really stuck to it. But depending on the type of contract, whether it's a guaranteed maximum price, which gives owners great comfort, or time and materials, what we see, and I've done this enough now to know and to see, what we see are, let me couch it again, nothing's perfect, and there's going to be some overcharges here and undercharges there. But what we tend to see are consistent overcharges on aspects of the project that are just clear overcharges, and it's not a mistake. I'll just tell you, there are clear overcharges. For example, on a huge time and materials project, which is not typically how big projects are done, the backup invoices don't match what the owner was charged for things sometimes. And with regard to guaranteed maximum price, what we see are pass-through charges that should truly be pass-through charges that have been marked up triple and quadruple or more. And, I just hate to see that on a project. And I've seen it often enough now to know that it's intentional and that it's not just a mistake. And so, those are the biggest problems that we see. So what we like to do is when the circumstances call for it, we get an auditor involved. And general contractors just don't like that. They don't like having to produce backup. And, that's really where they get into some big trouble. I think we've all seen across the nation, not that often, but we've seen it, criminal prosecutions for overbilling on government, state, federal projects. And so we see that less often of a criminal nature. But with regard to the financial aspect, that's the biggest thing that gets general contractors in trouble, is charging for things that they promised not to charge for.
Yeah.
That are more than just oops, we missed a decimal, or, gee, this was only $82,000 and we charged you $400,000. I hate to see that, but it's more prevalent than I'd like to admit.
You mentioned GMP and time and materials. I know there's a variety of different contract methods out there. What do you think about time and materials contracts?
I think that the contractor and the owner should do what's best for them. I think that general contractors are smart, and they like to give owners comfort. Owners, by and large, don't build 4 projects a year. General contractors, however, love to build 4 or more projects a year. And so general contractors are more practiced with the types of contracts they use. And they have learned that owners love the GMP contracts because from an owner standpoint, that's an amount which it will never exceed. And, that gives their accounting department comfort, that gives their funding comfort. If it's a government or a state or federal project, that gives the budget folks intense, great comfort. And so I see GMP contracts being used overwhelmingly instead of time and materials. So, it's whatever the parties want to agree to. America's a free country. The delivery method should be something that everybody's comfortable with. But, contractors really have a high level of comfort with these GMP agreements, and owners seem to like them too. So, whatever they like, that's up to them.
So you mentioned that sometimes there are errors and that turn out to be design errors. So how can a contractor protect themselves from being responsible for design errors and omissions? In other words, how can they protect themselves when the architect or engineer makes a mistake?
Well, let's remember a contractor is never responsible for an error in design if their contract is done right. Because the design is the job of the designer. It's not the job of the contractor. How is a general contractor supposed to know when there's a miscalculation by the mechanical engineer? Well, the fact is they can't, and they shouldn't. However, when a contractor has enough experience with a certain type of project, let's say hospitals again, when a contractor knows or should have known that XYZ design hasn't worked in the past, and an owner has hired them because they have experience in an area, let's say hospitals, there begins to be a little more risk for a contractor when they have built something that they knew or should have known was simply either not constructible or didn't work the last time. I mean, reasonable minds really can't differ, right? If you step out into the street and a car is going by, you're going to get hit by the car. Let's not throw common sense out the window. Don't step into the street in front of the speeding car. But though, what I said in the beginning is absolutely true. Everybody buys risk on a project. When a general contractor, does a let's say $500 million project, and the architects mess it up, or there's architectural malpractice or engineering malpractice, another way a contractor can protect themselves, and the owner for that matter, is to make sure the architect or engineer have plenty of insurance. And if there's anything that I've learned besides the two most certain things are death and taxes, the next one is architects and engineers never have enough insurance. And so at the outset of the project, and this is true for owners as well as general contractors, make sure the A&E guys have excess or umbrella coverage. They'll squawk about it. They'll say, I don't understand why we need this. Our work's only XYZ. But if they would just start buying excess and umbrella coverage, which doesn't cost nearly as much as the underlying, there's a marketplace for it. That helps the general contractor manage their risk. It helps the owner. It actually helps everybody. And so, those are the two or three things that a general contractor can do to make sure they don't have risk for what an architect or engineer does, is to make sure that an architect and engineer has plenty of insurance so the owner doesn't have to make a case that something may be the general contractor's fault. Make it easy for them. I've had clients who have asked architects and engineers to get excess or umbrella coverage, and they bellyache every time, right? Every time. Well, we don't see why we need this. Well, the fact is you don't need to see why you need it. The owner's going to pay for it. The owner pays the premium. It's a pass-through, remember?
Mm-hmm.
At least it should be. Nobody upcharges the insurance, right? That doesn't sound right, does it? And so if the owner pays for the excess or umbrella, it, especially on projects of a magnitude, it benefits the general contractor and the owner. And the truth is, it benefits the architect or engineers too.
Mm-hmm.
It's another risk shifting strategy that we see being used all the time now. And 10 years ago, if you would have said to me, well, the contractor needs to make sure the architect has more insurance. Well, I would have thought, well, why? Why is that? That's their business. Well, turns out it's all of our business. And making sure the design folks have an excess or umbrella policy, depending on the magnitude of the project, that has to be done. And remember, that extra insurance that the design folks have, that doesn't decrease the profit of the general contractor. It doesn't increase the risk of the general contractor. It only inures to everybody's benefit on the project who potentially has risk.
Yeah.
And let's not forget too, the insurance carriers that work with and for the general contractors and the A&E guys. They're good at what they do. Those folks who set the premiums, the premium may be a little more than you want to pay, but the owner's okay to pay it almost always. Don't complain about the premium. Let the owner pay it. Make it a pass-through. Everybody's protected. And in the words of a wise man that I once knew, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst.
All right. So I managed projects for a long time, and there are a few things that I took away from my experience. Number one is I've heard this said: architects don't have checkbooks, right? So when there's a mistake, architects don't have checkbooks. This is just my experience. This is on some pretty large projects that range up to, say, $70 to $100 million in value. The other thing that I learned, it seemed like whenever there was an issue, it started with the contractor. Whether it was a maintenance issue, a performance issue, a design issue, whatever it was, the first guy who got a finger in his face was the contractor, usually. Like, oh, there's a construction defect. And I've had a few situations where I was that first guy. Hey, there was a problem with this thing you built. We need you to fix it. And it turned out to be that we built it exactly how it was designed. And what I found is it's important how you respond to those things as a contractor. And maybe it's for the whole team. So when an issue comes up, let's say there's some sort of an apparent defect. It's a HVAC performance issue in a hospital, or it's raining inside of a building. There's condensation inside of a large building, some kind of weird issue going on. How should a contractor respond to that?
Well, there's two flavors of that. I would say I would break that into two different categories. One is, listen, the contractor is there on the project every day. They're living it. They work in it. They eat in it sometimes. They put their hands on every piece of it. And so it's only natural that the owner, would talk to the contractor. So the number one thing to do is you don't ignore it. Engage, the architect, engage the owner, and talk about it. Send emails about it. And the two ways this breaks out are, it's always one of two ways. One is, and you're talking about something near completion where the work's already been done. Things are already done. You're heading towards, substantial completion, or maybe you're past it. Maybe you've even already got your C of O for the building, or a large portion of it. If it's something that can be resolved, and we're not talking about something doesn't match a color, or there's a minor issue, but if it's something you can take care of and remedy, you should do that. You should absolutely do that. And if the architect is the one whose responsibility, or the engineer, then the contractor should hold fast. Remember, market forces always prevail, and it's the magic of the invisible hand, so to speak, right? From Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. It's as true as gravity. Put the risk where the person has assumed the risk, or taken on the risk. So if it truly is a design problem, let's say the air conditioning, that should go to the MEP through the architect. And between the two of them, they need to come up with a fix. And the general contractor should demand two things. Send me a written scope of the fix, and give me a date by which it'll be finished. Those things drive the process, and the owner will appreciate that. Now, the second category of these things is when something's so wrong that it really can't be remedied without impacting everybody's bottom line. That's when you put your insurance carriers on notice, and you tell the owner, because remember, contractors like to make sure they have a good relationship with the owner. That's very important. And if you've got such a good relationship with the owner, you should tell them, hey, we have insurance that'll help pay for this. And you should make sure that the insurance carriers for the mechanical engineer and the architect are all put on notice. By doing that, the contractor doesn't use the money that they have planned on profit in the project, and the insurance company, the money comes out of a different bucket. Sure, there's a deductible, but if the defect is such a magnitude that it's just going to wreck your project profit, kick it to the carrier. That's what they're for. And that's when everybody needs, frankly, a good lawyer. Because when the problem is big enough, you can either deal with it now, or you can deal with it down the road. And if you ignore the owner, that will just anger them, as it should. Nobody likes being ignored. And, let the market forces prevail. Let the people who are in charge of placing the risk place the risk. And in this case, if you followed Marc Gravely's instructions and made sure the design professionals have plenty of insurance, their insurance carrier will take responsibility ultimately, or still fight you some. And if you do it right, the people who are responsible, who are insured because they have an excess or umbrella policy, they will make the owner whole. By doing that, the contractor maintains a great relationship with the owner, helps to place everything where it should be, and their profit margins maintain. It's win-win all around, and the people who have taken on the risk are the ones who fund the risk. And that's the way it should be. That's why our economy works the way it does, is because market forces are really what you want to use to your benefit.
My next follow-up question is, what are some of the mistakes to avoid in that case? And one of them is to ignore it. Don't ignore the owner. Don't hope it goes away. What are a couple of other mistakes to avoid that you see people tend to try that don't help or make things worse?
Yeah. So what we see most often is, representing only owners, is that the design professionals or the contractor aren't truthful with the owner as to what the cause of the problem is. And, I don't know about you, but growing up, my father is a retired Army colonel. And, I learned not to lie to my father. But that wasn't always so. When I was a teenager, I would not always be truthful with my dad, as I'm sure many other people weren't, especially when I was wrong. But it was always worse when I didn't tell him the truth in the beginning. And so, as silly as it may sound, you just need to be truthful in the beginning. If it may be partly your fault, you need to talk about that. Because if you're not honest with the owner right in the beginning, then they're going to be mad at you later on when they find out maybe you weren't being entirely truthful with them. What do you think happens then? Now they're not just motivated by the objective project completion. Now there's animosity. And do you think the owner is more likely or less likely to file a lawsuit if there is more animosity? Well, the answer is, I've got two matters like that right now. Large projects where the contractor has just thumbed their nose at the owner, thinking they won't do anything, and now the owner's angry. And for me, well, that's the best kind of client to have. It's full steam ahead. I've been lied to now, and some that can get around. That gets around, especially on large projects. How was this joint venture, to you, or say owners and owners' lawyers? Well, it was okay until they lied to me, and so that happens. So, I learned that telling my dad the truth in the beginning, although it was still painful, it was far less painful than not being truthful in the beginning and him finding out that I wasn't truthful with him.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and I found that the truth always comes out, and it always comes out, and you're better off just to bite the bullet. The truth comes out, and then problems they don't go away. Number one, they also don't stay the same. They always grow, and they get hairier, and they grow legs, and they get up and they start running around and causing all sorts of problems, and they just cause all sorts of chaos and ripple effects. So it's not, I guess what I would boil it down to say is, it's not a matter of if you're going to have to address this issue. It's a matter of when are you going to address it, and how big are you going to let it get? That's really what your choices are.
And let's not forget, Todd, everybody answers to someone else. The superintendent answers to someone else. The owner's rep answers to someone else. And pretty soon, when either one can't make progress in resolving something, the person that they answer to finds out, and now they want answers. And the biggest thing I hear with owners is, we've got such a great relationship with the general contractor. Why won't they just put their insurance company on notice of the problem? And the contractor invariably, responds with anger. And how could you say that? We would never do that, when it's clear that there's a problem that is of the contractor's doing. Something? Put your insurance carrier on notice, and let the insurance money bucket help you resolve things, because that bucket of money is not in your profit and loss statement. It's not. And the longer you put it off, the worse it gets. But I agree with you.
All right. A couple of more of my favorite questions I'd like to ask. I like to ask everybody I interview. The first one is this: what is something you believe to be true about business that some might think is a little unconventional, maybe even crazy?
The biggest thing is that it is, and your listeners may not like this, but it's the one thing that it is true, and I couldn't believe it, but it's happened so many times, is that owners being lied to about costs. It's everywhere, and it doesn't even surprise me anymore that once we find out what the real charge was, I always think, how did they think they were going to get away with this? But it keeps happening. So I guess, given the law of averages, I guess it does work sometimes. But on the cases that I see, on the projects that I see with problems, that's what it is. And so that may not be of the stripe that you wanted to talk about, but that's what it is. It's odd to me.
Yeah. Yeah. The next one is about failure. How has a failure or what appeared to be a failure set you up for later success?
Yeah. So I spent a year in medical school, hated it, hated it, hated it. And I quit partway through, and, I felt like a big failure. And, I'd never wanted to go to law school. I was a science guy growing up. I think I've got a master's degree in biotechnology. But I had failed in my eyes and in everyone I knew's eyes by quitting medical school. But my heart just wasn't in it, and so not that I wanted to be a lawyer ever, but I had to fail before I really learned what it meant to succeed. And so that's my personal answer.
I can imagine that was tough because you had a lot of time and money invested. You had a master's degree, a year of medical school, and then to in the moment, what did that feel like at that time when you were on the cusp of making the decision to quit medical school?
Well, I felt like a failure. I knew for sure that that's not what I wanted to do. My father wanted to be a doctor. He was a research scientist mostly, and so I just kind of adopted his vision for himself. And so, the path that I ended up taking for my life, that I decided on was vastly different than anyone in the family had ever said about. So, but at the time, boy, it sure made me feel like a failure, which technically, I mean, actually, I was. I failed at it, and so, but that's okay. One of the wonderful things about life is that it's not how many times you fall down; it's what you do when you fall down, and how you respond to failures. So I think every listener you've got has had a failure, either small or large, and they've learned that they just had to get back up.
Yeah, definitely. All right, two more questions. You wrote a book recently, Reframing America's Infrastructure. What's the message? It's kind of interesting to me that someone in your position wrote a book about infrastructure. So what's the message that you want to get out there with this book?
Well, it's a book about our country. It's a book about America. It talks about the history of infrastructure, which helps to define civilizations. It talks about the wonderful infrastructure that exists here in the United States. Our founders noted what a wonderful inland waterway system we've got that helps to move things around, and we've got so many natural resources here. The message of the book is that investment, both by federal and state governments, in infrastructure is essential for us to thrive in the next century. The contrast is what China's doing now and what they're building. The efficiencies they're building into their system are things that we need to build into our system, and that we'll all be a lot better off if we focus and follow the process of designing and building wonderful infrastructure that we can use to be more effective and efficient. There's a review at Kirkus Books. The people that don't want to buy the book, go to the Kirkus review, and you can read it. It gives a good flavor. But it's said that I give, there's over 1,000 footnotes, but I supply what's called an unnerving number of examples of failing infrastructure. And so, true as that is, America's got great days ahead, but the better our infrastructure is, the better off we will all be.
So let's talk about the process of writing a book. What surprised you, if anything, about the book writing process?
Well, I can tell you what, it's much harder than anything I've ever done in my life. I don't know that I would do another one, but it was my COVID project. And I knew I would have some extra time, not driving to work, maybe not going into the office. And so I had thought about the book, kind of a vision of where America could go, maybe how we could get there. some things we could tweak to help our process. But I stopped twice, but started back again because I didn't want to fail at writing the book, I suppose. But it was a real slog, I'll tell you. It was a real slog. It gave me a huge appreciation for people that are better at writing than me. But the most difficult thing was just having the self-discipline to actually sit down, to pull together some facts and to write about what I thought with any discipline. Have you ever tried anything, that you really had to be disciplined at? Do you run every day? Do you, have something that you do that's a habit that's really good for you?
Yeah, I hate running. I tell people, if you ever see me running, you should probably run too, because there's something chasing me. But yeah, this podcast is something I've been doing for about 8 years, and I put it on the shelf once myself. I'm like, screw that. Wow, that's a lot of work, and why would I ever want to do that? But yeah, I'm really glad that I didn't quit.
But at some point, though, you really hit your stride, didn't you? And it became part of your day, right?
Yeah, it becomes intuitive. It just becomes part of the daily, weekly rhythm. It becomes a habit. I guess it's like those crazy runners talk about getting the runner's high, and they actually start getting something back out of it. Yeah.
So you're on the podcast high right now?
That's right. I'm on the podcast high. Yeah. Well, good stuff. So the name of the book is Reframing America's Infrastructure. Where can people find that book? Where's the best place to go if they want to check that book out?
Yeah. Thanks, Todd. That's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can buy it online, or you can email me the copy that you buy, and I'll send you a signed copy back if you'd like.
Oh, nice. So what's the best way for people to connect with you, whether it's on your website, social media, if people want to follow you or get in touch with you, where should they go?
Sure. People can connect with me on LinkedIn, Marc Gravely on LinkedIn, or you can go to the law firm website at gravely.law. And I just started a Twitter account, but that was 2 days ago. So that's a mixture of insurance and construction. So
Gotcha.
if you want to learn about all that, you can go there too. But thanks so much for chatting today.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as Twitter goes, we're recording this a couple of weeks after Elon took over Twitter. So by the time you're listening to it, Twitter may not exist. Who knows? People think it's I think the platform could be gone, but I have a feeling Elon's going to pull it out. So yeah, those links are going to be in the show notes, and it's Marc Gravely, Marc with a C, right?
Marc with a C. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to be on here, Marc. Thanks for all the work you're doing.